Have you ever watched an entire community slowly die of thirst while one person held the key to salvation? What would you do if you discovered the secret to survival, but sharing it could destroy everything you've worked for? This is Emily Ray Harper. She's a shy farmer who never wanted attention, but when a billionaire offers her $3 million for a secret that could save her dying town, her choice will reveal something powerful about human nature, corporate greed, and what it really means to help your neighbors. Settle in, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about doing the right thing. Westbrook, Kansas, population 3,147. A farming town where everyone knows everyone, where handshakes still mean something, and where the local diner serves as both restaurant and town hall. But this summer something terrible is happening. The worst drought in 30 years has turned this green paradise into a cracked, brown wasteland. Farmers who've worked their land for generations are watching their crops wither. Children can't swim in the lake because there's no lake left, just a muddy crater where bass used to jump. Old Mr. Peterson down at the hardware store keeps a tally on his chalkboard. Wells drilled this month, 47. Wells that found water, 3. The number haunts everyone who sees it. But drive down County Road 12, past the for sale signs and abandoned tractors, and you'll see something impossible. One farm, one single small farm where the corn still waves green in the breeze, where tomatoes hang heavy and red on their vines, where the sprinklers still run every evening like clockwork. That farm belongs to Emily Ray Harper. 29. Years old, lives alone, keeps to herself. Always wears that wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her eyes as if she's trying to disappear. In a world where drought has brought a community to its knees, one shy farmer possesses something that defies explanation, and she's about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can have is exactly what everyone else needs. But how do you keep a secret when that secret is the difference between life and death for everyone you've ever known? When help becomes a burden. What happens when your greatest blessing becomes your biggest curse? Picture this. You've spent years perfecting something that could save lives, but the moment people discover it, everything changes. Emily Harper thought she could quietly help her struggling farm survive the worst drought in decades. She never imagined that her grandfather's old irrigation system would make her the target of corporate vultures and angry neighbors. But when desperation meets opportunity, ordinary people are forced to make extraordinary choices. Let me tell you about the day Emily had to choose between $3 million and her soul. Emily never meant to stand out. She'd learned geology at the community college before her mother's accident forced her to come home and take over the farm. While other farmers drilled deeper and deeper, spending their life savings on wells that came up dry, Emily had quietly restored something most people had forgotten existed: her grandfather's old irrigation system. Built in the 1940s with handmade clay pipes and a network of channels that collected every drop of rainwater, filtered it through layers of earth and gravel, and stored it in underground cisterns carved from limestone. She'd spent 3 years perfecting it. 3 years of solitary work, studying old blueprints by lamplight, teaching herself hydrology from library books, testing and adjusting until every drop of precious water was captured and preserved. But Emily made one mistake. She forgot that, in a small town, there's no such thing as a private miracle. Sarah Jo Mitchell, the local newspaper reporter, drove past Emily's farm on a Sunday morning assignment. Sarah had gone to high school with Emily, remembered her as the quiet girl who sat in the back row, always had the right answers, but never raised her hand. Now Sarah stared at Emily's green oasis in the middle of a drought-stricken landscape, and felt her journalist instincts kick in. By Monday morning, the headline read, "Local farm thrives despite historic drought. How?" The article was meant to be uplifting, a feel-good story about ingenuity and hope. Sarah had no idea she'd just lit a fuse. By Tuesday, cars were lined up along County Road 12. Farmers with desperate eyes peered over Emily's fence. Some knocked on her door. Others just stared, trying to figure out her secret. "Please," said Mrs. Anderson, whose family had farmed here for 4 generations. "Just tell us what you're doing. My husband hasn't slept in weeks. We're going to lose everything." Emily stood on her porch, hat pulled low, hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I can't." When survival is at stake, privacy becomes impossible. And Emily discovers that having the solution doesn't automatically make you the hero. Sometimes it makes you the villain. But Emily's reluctance to share wasn't about selfishness. It was about something far more dangerous than drought. What happens when helping others would have put you at risk? Imagine you're Emily Harper, standing in your kitchen at 6 a.m., staring at a newspaper headline that's about to change your life forever. Local farm thrives. Despite historic drought, how? You never asked for attention. You just wanted to save your family's farm. But now the whole town is asking questions you can't answer without revealing a secret that could either save everyone or put that salvation in the hands of people who see water as nothing more than profit. This is the story of what happened when one shy woman had to choose between hiding and fighting, between safety and justice. And trust me, her decision will surprise you. Mr. Earl Tannen had been watching Emily from his porch across the road. At 62, the retired hydraulic engineer had seen enough corporate water grabs to know why Emily was scared. He walked across the road one evening as Emily was adjusting her irrigation lines. "You know they're talking," he said quietly. Emily didn't look up. "Let them talk. They're saying you're selfish, that you're hoarding water while families suffer." Emily's hand stilled on the pipe fitting. "What would you do, Mr. Tannen?" Earl looked at her system. The clever network of channels and filters, the ingenious rainwater collection, the perfectly balanced underground storage. "Honey, this isn't just irrigation. This is engineering genius. And if word gets out exactly how you're doing this..." He didn't need to finish. They both knew what happened when big corporations discovered small innovations. They bought them, patented them, and sold them back to the very communities that needed them most. But the pressure was mounting from all sides. Pastor Williams approached Emily after Sunday service. "The congregation is hurting, Emily. Maybe God gave you this gift to share with others." The town council scheduled a meeting. Mayor Davidson, trying to be diplomatic, suggested Emily could consult on community water projects. "Think of it as civic duty," he said. Even Sheriff Tommy Briggs, who'd been her father's best friend, pulled her aside. "Emily, I'm getting calls. People are frustrated. Some are talking about filing complaints with the county about water rights violations." "Are they right?" Emily asked. "Am I violating something?" Tommy shook his head. "Legally, no. You're using rainwater on your own land. But legally right and community right aren't always the same thing." That night, Emily sat on her porch, listening to the gentle sound of water flowing through her grandfather's pipes. She thought about the families struggling around her, about children who couldn't take baths, about elderly neighbors rationing drinking water. She also thought about the phone call she'd received that afternoon. A smooth voice introducing himself as Kyle Hammond, CEO of AgriPure Corporation. "I'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement," he'd said. Emily had hung up without responding, but she knew he wouldn't give up that easily. Sometimes the greatest moral dilemmas aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right, and Emily is about to discover that good intentions can lead to consequences no one expected. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of helicopter rotors overhead. What's the real price of salvation when it comes with corporate strings attached? Emily Harper is about to find out. She's standing in her dusty yard, facing a billionaire in a $1,000 suit who just landed a helicopter on her neighbor's field. He's offering her more money than she's ever dreamed of. All she has to do is sell him the water system that could save her drought-stricken community. It sounds like the perfect solution. Everyone gets water. She gets wealthy. Problem solved. But Emily is about to discover that when corporations offer to solve your problems, they're usually creating bigger ones. What she does next will shock this billionaire, inspire her community, and teach us all something profound about the difference between helping people and helping yourself. The helicopter landed in the empty field next to Emily's farm, kicking up dust clouds that settled on her tomato plants. Kyle Hammond stepped out, wearing a $1,000 suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was everything Emily expected. tall, confident, radiating the kind of authority that comes from never hearing the word no. Behind him came an entourage, lawyers, engineers, and a camera crew. Sarah Jo was there too, her press badge gleaming, camera ready. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a public performance. "Miss Harper," Kyle's voice carried across the yard. "I believe we have much to discuss." Emily stood on her porch, still wearing her work clothes, dirt under her fingernails, hat casting shadows over her face. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. "I'll make this simple," Kyle announced, loud enough for the cameras. $3 million cash for your water system design and a licensing agreement for AgriPure Corporation. The number hung in the air like smoke. $3 million. More money than Emily had ever imagined. Enough to secure her future, to never worry about mortgage payments or equipment repairs. "Think about it," Kyle continued, his voice smooth as honey. "With our resources, we can scale your innovation. Build these systems across the entire Midwest. Help thousands of farmers instead of just one." It sounded reasonable. It sounded generous. It sounded like the solution everyone wanted. But Mr. Tannen, who'd been watching from his porch, walked over slowly. "And what would these systems cost the farmers?" he asked. Kyle's smile tightened slightly. "Our business model ensures sustainability through reasonable user fees." "How much, Mr. Tannen pressed. "That would depend on usage and local market conditions." Emily felt her stomach drop. She understood corporate speak well enough to know what that meant. "You want to buy my system so you can sell water back to the people who need it most," she said quietly. "We want to create a sustainable business model that benefits everyone," Kyle corrected, "including you. $3 million, Miss Harper. Think about what that could mean for your life." The cameras were rolling. The whole town would see this. Emily could feel the weight of expectations, her neighbors who desperately needed water, her community that saw her as selfish, her own fears about the future. The moment of ultimate temptation arrives, wrapped in reasonable arguments and financial security, but Emily realizes that some gifts become curses the moment they're sold, to the highest bidder. And then Kyle Hammond said the words that changed everything. What happens when a quiet person finally finds their voice at the moment it matters most? For 29 years, Emily Harper has been the invisible woman of Westbrook, Kansas. The shy farmer who keeps her head down, avoids crowds, and speaks only when spoken to. But right now she's standing in front of news cameras, facing down a billionaire CEO, with her entire community watching. In the next few minutes, she's going to say something that will change everything, not just for her, small farming town, but for how we think about who really owns the solutions to our biggest problems. This is the moment when the quietest person in the room becomes the most powerful voice for justice. And what she's about to reveal will make you question everything you think you know about courage. Kyle Hammond wasn't used to waiting for answers. As Emily stood silently on her porch, he played his final card. "Miss Harper, I want to be completely transparent with you." His voice carried a subtle edge now. "Whether you sell to us or not, we're moving forward with water solutions in this region. We have teams studying your system right now from publicly accessible areas." He paused, letting that sink in. "If you don't partner with us, we'll simply reverse engineer what we can observe and file our own patents. At that point, you'll have no legal recourse, no financial benefit, and farmers will still pay for water. They just won't be paying you." The threat was clear, delivered with corporate politeness but unmistakable intent. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Sarah Jo stepped forward, camera still rolling. "Are you saying you'll steal her innovation if she doesn't sell it to you?" "I'm saying intellectual property law is complex and naturally occurring. Water management techniques have limited patent protection," Kyle replied smoothly. "We're offering Miss Harper a chance to benefit from what she's created, rather than watch it become public domain." Mr. Tannen's face had gone red. "You son of a Earl." Emily's voice cut through the tension. She stepped down from her porch, walking slowly toward Kyle Hammond. For the first time in years, Emily Ray Harper looked directly into someone's eyes without flinching. "This land has been in my family for 70 years, she said quietly. "My grandfather built those irrigation channels with his own hands during the Dust Bowl, when people were dying of thirst and hunger. Her voice grew stronger. He didn't build them to get rich. He built them because that's what neighbors do for each other. Kyle shifted impatiently. Miss Harper, with all due respect, sentiment doesn't solve today's water crisis. Business solutions do. No, Emily said, and for the first time, her voice carried across the yard with absolute certainty. You're wrong. She turned to face the cameras, to face her community, to face the choice that would define not just her future, but the future of everyone she'd ever known. My water system works because it's built on the principle that water belongs to the land and the people who care for it. The moment you turn it into a commodity to be bought and sold, it stops being a solution and becomes another form of control. Words were flowing now, years of quiet observation and careful thought finally finding voice. You want to know why I won't sell? Because I've seen what happens when corporations solve problems for profit. The solution becomes more expensive than the problem, and the people who need help most are the ones who can't afford to buy it back. Kyle's polished exterior cracked slightly. That's an idealistic but impractical worldview, Miss Harper. Business creates efficiency and scale. Business creates dependency, Emily shot back, and I won't be responsible for turning my neighbor's desperation into someone else's profit margin. In the crucible of public pressure and financial temptation, Emily discovers that her quiet strength has been preparing her for this moment, the moment when speaking truth becomes more important than keeping peace. But Kyle Hammond hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by taking no for an answer. What happens when a community must choose between immediate relief and long-term independence? Kyle Hammond's helicopter had barely lifted off when the phone calls started. Some supportive. You did the right thing, Emily. Others less so. $3 million? Are you out of your mind? By evening, the town hall was packed for an emergency meeting. Mayor Davidson tried to maintain order, but emotions were running too high. She had a chance to help all of us, shouted Jim Kowalski, whose wheat farm was 3 weeks from foreclosure. Instead, she'd rather keep her secret and watch us all go bankrupt. It's not her responsibility to save everyone else, countered Mrs. Peterson from the hardware store. Besides, did you hear what that corporate man was really offering? He was going to steal her work whether she sold it or not. Sheriff Briggs stood up. Let's get the facts straight. Emily Harper has broken no laws. She's using rainwater collection on her own property. That's not only legal, it's smart. Legal doesn't make it right, called out another voice. When the community is suffering, we all have obligations to each other. Sarah Jo had been recording everything for the paper. Now she stood up, her reporter's notebook in hand. I've been investigating AgriPure Corporation since this morning, she announced. In Nebraska, they bought out 3 family-designed irrigation systems. Those farmers are now paying AgriPure $400 per acre-foot for water that used to be free. In Iowa, they've got patents on rainwater collection methods that farmers can't legally use without paying licensing fees. The room fell silent. Emily didn't. Just turned down $3 million, Sarah continued. She turned down the chance to make all of you permanent customers of a corporation that sees water as a profit center. But Jim Kowalski wasn't satisfied. So what's her solution? Watch us all lose our farms while she keeps her green garden. That's when Mr. Earl Tannen stood up. At 62, he commanded respect in a room full of farmers who remembered him solving their irrigation problems for decades. I've been Emily's neighbor for 5 years, he said quietly. You want to know what kind of person she is? Last winter, when old Pete Garrison's well pump froze, Emily spent 3 days fixing it. Didn't charge him a penny. When the Martinez family's irrigation line broke, Emily lent them equipment and helped with the repairs. He looked around the room. She's been helping people all along, just quietly, the way she does everything. Emily had been sitting in the back row trying to disappear as usual, but now she stood up, her hat in her hands. I have a proposal, she said, her voice barely audible at first, then stronger. I have a proposal. Her community in crisis reveals its true character, and Emily begins to understand that the choice isn't between helping and not helping. It's between helping on her terms or on corporate terms. For the first time in her adult life, Emily Harper was about to speak her mind in public. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that occur to quiet people who've been thinking while everyone else has been talking. Emily stood in the packed town hall, every eye focused on her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I understand why you're angry with me," she began. "You're facing the worst drought in 30 years, and it looks like I'm hoarding the solution while you suffer." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But I also understand what AgriPure Corporation really wanted to buy. They didn't want my water system. They wanted control over water access in this entire region. She took a deep breath. "There's a third option." Emily walked to the front of the room, where Mayor Davidson had set up a whiteboard for the meeting. "My grandfather's irrigation system isn't magic. It's engineering based on principles anyone can learn. Rainwater collection, natural filtration, through layered soil and gravel, underground storage in limestone caverns." She started sketching on the whiteboard, her nervousness disappearing as she focused on the technical details. "The reason it works on my farm is because my grandfather spent years studying the specific geology of our area. Every farm in this region has different soil composition, different water table levels, different natural drainage patterns." Jim Kowalski leaned forward. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying each farm needs its own customized system, and I'm offering to help design them." The room erupted in surprised conversation. Emily waited for quiet, then continued. "But there are conditions. First, we document everything and file it with the State Agricultural Extension Office as public domain knowledge. No one, not me, not AgriPure, not anyone, can patent what we develop together." Mr. Tannen was smiling now. "Smart girl." "Second, we form a cooperative. Everyone contributes labor and materials according to their ability. No one pays cash for water solutions." "And third?" asked Mayor Davidson. Emily's voice grew firm. "If any corporate entity tries to buy, patent, or control these systems, we fight them together. This knowledge stays in our community, managed by our community, for our community." Sarah Jo was scribbling notes frantically. This was exactly the kind of story that made small-town journalism worthwhile. Sheriff Briggs stood up. "I've got to ask the practical question, Emily. This sounds generous, but can you actually do what you're proposing? Design custom water systems for dozens of farms?" Emily glanced at Mr. Tannen, who nodded encouragingly. "I can't do it alone," she admitted. "But Mr. Tannen has 40 years of hydraulic engineering experience. Mrs. Chen taught geology at the High School for 20 years before she retired. Pastor William's son is studying environmental engineering at Kansas State." She looked around the room. "We have the knowledge and skills right here in this room. We just need to combine them." For the first time since the drought began, the room felt hopeful instead of desperate. True solutions don't come from corporate boardrooms or individual genius. They come from communities that choose cooperation over competition and wisdom over profit. But good intentions and community spirit wouldn't mean much if the plan didn't actually work. The most beautiful plans in the world mean nothing until they're tested by reality. 3 weeks after the town hall meeting, Emily stood in the morning sunlight surveying the Kowalski farm with a team of volunteers. Jim had been her biggest critic, but he'd also been first to volunteer for the pilot program. "The geological survey shows limestone bedrock about 8 feet down," reported Mrs. Chen, consulting her clipboard. "That's perfect for underground water storage." Mr. Tannen was examining the natural slope of Jim's land. "We can channel runoff from that ridge into collection basins here and here," he said, marking spots with orange flags. Emily knelt to examine the soil composition, feeling the texture between her fingers the way her grandfather had taught her. "The clay content is higher than on my land, so we'll need to adjust the filtration layers." Pastor Williams's son, Mike, was taking photos and measurements. "For his senior engineering project," his father explained proudly. What struck Emily most was how naturally everyone worked together. Jim's teenage sons dug test holes while their grandmother provided lemonade and unsolicited advice. The Martinez family contributed their backhoe in exchange for being next on the list. Mrs. Peterson's husband delivered supplies at cost. "This isn't going to work overnight," Emily cautioned as they planned the construction timeline. "It'll take most of the summer to build. and maybe another season to fine-tune the system. Will it be ready for next year's planting? Jim asked. If we do it right, yes. By midsummer, word had spread beyond Westbrook. A reporter from the Kansas City Star drove out to document the Community Water Cooperative, a professor from Kansas. State University asked to include their project in a research study on sustainable agriculture. And Kyle Hammond called again. Miss Harper, I'll be frank with you. His voice was less smooth now, tinged with frustration. You're creating legal complications for AgriPure's operations in Kansas. We're prepared to increase our offer to $5 million for exclusive licensing rights. Emily was standing in Jim Kowalski's half-finished water collection system when she took the call. Around her, a dozen neighbors were working in the summer heat, building something that would benefit everyone and belong to no one. Mr. Hammond, she said clearly, I believe I was frank with you before. The answer is still no. Miss Harper, you're being unreasonable. We have legal teams preparing patent applications based on publicly observable techniques. You'll end up with nothing. Emily watched Mrs. Chen explaining soil permeability to a group of fascinated teenagers. She watched Mr. Tannen adjusting pipe angles with the patience of a craftsman. She watched her community learning to save itself. Mr. Hammond, you're wrong about what I'll end up with, she said, but thank you for the call. She hung up and got back to work. Real success isn't measured in dollars or corporate contracts. It's measured in communities that become stronger, more self-sufficient, and more connected to each other. But the true test wasn't Kyle Hammond's frustration. It was whether the systems would actually work when the next drought came. What does victory look like when it's measured not in money, but in community survival? The following spring brought normal rainfall, but Emily knew the real test was yet to come. Climate patterns suggested another drought cycle within 5 years, and the water systems needed to prove themselves before then. By May, 12 farms in the Westbrook area had functioning water collection and storage systems. Each one was unique, adapted to local geology and specific needs, but all were based on the same principles Emily's grandfather had developed decades ago. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. The Kowalski farm was storing enough water to irrigate through a 6-month dry spell. The Martinez family's system was so efficient, they were sharing surplus water with elderly neighbors. Mrs. Patterson's smaller system kept her vegetable garden thriving and supplied fresh water for her chickens. But the most significant change wasn't in water storage. It was in the community itself. The monthly meetings in the church basement had evolved from desperate crisis management to enthusiastic knowledge sharing. Farmers were collaborating instead of competing, sharing techniques and resources in ways that had been forgotten for generations. Mike Williams finished his engineering degree and returned to Westbrook instead of seeking work in Kansas City. "Why would I leave?" he asked Sarah Jo during an interview. "This is where the innovation is happening." Emily found herself in an unexpected role. The shy woman who had once avoided eye contact was now teaching workshops on sustainable water management. Agricultural extension agents from 3 counties attended her presentations. A documentary crew from PBS spent a week filming the cooperative, but perhaps the most satisfying moment came on a Tuesday evening in September. Kyle Hammond called one last time. "Miss Harper, AgriPure would like to discuss a consulting arrangement. We're developing community-based water solutions, and we could use your expertise." Emily almost laughed. "Mr. Hammond, I appreciate the offer, but I'm already consulting for the people who need it most. We could offer very competitive compensation. I'm not interested in being compensated. I'm interested in making sure farmers control their own water access." There was a long pause. "You realize you could be wealthy by now if you'd made different choices." Emily looked out her kitchen window at the evening light on her grandfather's restored irrigation channels, at the green fields that had attracted so much attention, at the dirt road where neighbors still stopped to share advice and check on each other. "Mr. Hammond, I am wealthy. I just measure wealth differently than you do. True wealth isn't found in bank accounts or corporate contracts. It's found in communities that have learned to take care of themselves and each other." But Emily's story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to ripple outward in ways she never expected. How do you measure the impact of one quiet woman who chose community over corporation. 2 years later, the Westbrook Water Cooperative had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What started as Emily's reluctant sharing of her grandfather's irrigation system had become a model studied by agricultural communities across the Midwest. The documentation they'd filed with the State Agricultural Extension Office had been downloaded over 10,000 times. Universities were teaching case studies based on their cooperative structure. International development organizations were adapting their techniques for water-scarce regions in Africa and South America. But for Emily, the most meaningful changes were still local. Sarah Joe's reporting on the cooperative had won a Pulitzer Prize for local journalism. She'd used the recognition to launch a non-profit organization supporting community-based agricultural innovation. Mr. Tannen had come out of retirement to establish a hydraulic engineering consultancy specializing in small farm water systems. "Best job I ever had," he told everyone who'd listen. The monthly meetings in the church basement had evolved into the Westbrook Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, attracting visitors from around the world who wanted to learn how a small Kansas farming community had solved its water crisis without corporate intervention. Emily still lived alone on her grandfather's farm, still wore the wide-brimmed hat, still preferred listening to talking. But she was no longer trying to disappear. On a warm September evening, she stood in her garden watching the sunset and thinking about the phone call she'd received that morning. It was from Dr. Maria Santos, an agricultural engineer working with farming communities in drought-stricken regions of Guatemala. Dr. Santos had read about the Westbrook Cooperative and wanted to adapt their techniques for indigenous farmers who were facing corporate water privatization. "We're not asking for money or patents," Dr. Santos had explained. "We're asking for knowledge and maybe some guidance on community organizing." Emily had agreed immediately. The following month, she would travel to Guatemala, her first trip outside Kansas, to teach rainwater collection and help establish a farming cooperative. "Your grandfather would be proud," Mr. Tannen had said when she told him about the trip. Emily thought about that as she walked through her irrigation system in the evening light. Her grandfather had built these channels during the Dust Bowl, when farmers were losing their land and their hope. He'd built them with his own hands, one stone at a time, because that's what you did when your community needed water. Now his granddaughter was helping communities around the world build their own systems, one project at a time, because that's what you did when people needed hope. The shy farmer who had once hidden from attention had become someone who helped others find their voice. The woman who had refused to sell her secret had shown the world that some gifts become more valuable when they're shared freely. Individual courage ripples outward in ways we can never predict, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show others that corporate solutions aren't the only solutions. As Emily's story demonstrates, the choice between profit and principle isn't just about money. It's about what kind of world we choose to build. What if the real drought isn't about water at all, but about communities that have forgotten how to take care of themselves? Emily Harper's story isn't really about irrigation systems or corporate greed or even drought. It's about something much more fundamental, the choice between dependency and self-reliance, between community solutions and corporate control. In a world where we're constantly told that complex problems require expert solutions, that innovation comes from boardrooms and research labs, that individuals are powerless against systemic challenges. Emily's story offers a different narrative. She reminds us that some of our most effective solutions come from quiet observation, patient experimentation, and the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. Her grandfather's irrigation system wasn't cutting-edge technology. It was appropriate technology, designed for local conditions by someone who understood those conditions intimately. The corporate offer Emily refused represents more than just money. It represents the seductive promise that someone else will solve our problems for us, that we can purchase solutions instead of developing them, that expertise is something we buy rather than something we cultivate. But as Emily discovered, accepting that offer would have meant giving up something more valuable than financial security: community self-determination. When AgriPure Corporation wanted to buy her water system, they weren't just buying pipes and pumps. They were buying the right to control who had access to water, at what cost, under what conditions. They were transforming a community resource into a corporate asset. Emily's refusal to sell wasn't just about preserving her grandfather's legacy. It was about preserving her community's ability to solve its own problems. Think about your own community. What challenges are you facing that corporations promise to solve for a price? What traditional knowledge and local expertise are you overlooking? In favor of outside experts? What cooperative solutions might be possible if people worked together instead of competing for individual advantage? The Westbrook Water Cooperative succeeded because it was built on principles that transcend agriculture: shared knowledge, mutual aid, community ownership, and collective problem-solving. These principles work in urban neighborhoods as well as rural farms. They work for education, healthcare, economic development, and social challenges. They work whenever people choose cooperation over competition, wisdom over wealth, and community control over corporate convenience. Emily's story is ultimately about the power of ordinary people to solve extraordinary problems when they choose community over corporation, cooperation over competition, and wisdom over wealth. But perhaps the most important lesson from Westbrook, Kansas, is about the courage required to say no to easy answers and yes to hard work. What if you already have the solution to a problem that's bigger than yourself, but you're too scared to share it? Every one of us has an Emily Harper moment waiting for us. A moment when we possess something, knowledge, skills, resources, connections, that could help others. But sharing it requires courage we're not sure we possess. Maybe you're the person in your workplace who understands how to solve the recurring technical problems, but you're afraid that sharing your knowledge will make you less valuable, less irreplaceable. Maybe you're the neighbor who knows how to grow vegetables in difficult soil, but you haven't offered to teach others because you don't want the responsibility of being the garden expert. Maybe you're the parent who's figured out how to navigate the school system effectively, but you haven't shared your strategies with other parents because you don't want to seem like you're bragging or interfering. Maybe you're the community member who understands local history and traditional practices that could solve current problems, but you've stayed quiet because you don't think anyone would listen to you. Emily's story teaches us that the gifts we're most reluctant to share are often the ones our communities need most desperately. But her story also teaches us about the importance of sharing wisely. Emily didn't just give away her water system to anyone who asked. She created conditions that protected both the innovation and the community that would benefit from it. She insisted on documentation that prevented corporate appropriation. She required cooperative participation that ensured everyone contributed according to their ability. She maintained community control that kept decision-making local and accountable. These weren't selfish conditions, they were wise conditions that protected the long-term sustainability of the solution. When you're ready to share your own gifts, consider Emily's approach. First, understand what you're really protecting. Emily wasn't protecting water. She was protecting community autonomy. What values are you protecting when you hesitate to share your knowledge or resources? Second, create structures that preserve those values. Emily used legal documentation, cooperative organization, and community oversight to ensure her water systems served community needs rather than corporate profits. What structures could protect your contributions from being misused or co-opted? Third, build coalitions of support. Emily couldn't have succeeded alone. She needed Mr. Tannen's engineering expertise, Sarah Jo's communication skills, the community's labor and materials, and local leaders who were willing to facilitate cooperation. Who are your potential allies and collaborators? Fourth, start small and local. Emily didn't try to solve the global water crisis. She focused on helping her immediate neighbors develop sustainable solutions. What's the smallest, most local version of the contribution you could make? Finally, remember that saying no to exploitation isn't the same as saying no to sharing. Emily said no to corporate control precisely so she could say yes to community empowerment. Each of us possesses knowledge, skills, or resources that could benefit others, and Emily's story shows us how to share our gifts wisely in ways that empower communities rather than enriching corporations. But what about the people who want to help but don't feel like they have anything special to offer? What if the real lesson from Westbrook isn't about finding heroes, but about building communities that don't need heroes? One of the most important aspects of Emily's story is what happened after her individual courage moment. Instead of becoming the permanent water expert who solved everyone's problems, she helped create systems that made her own special knowledge unnecessary. The Westbrook Water Cooperative succeeded because it distributed expertise rather than centralizing it. Emily taught others how to assess soil conditions, design filtration systems, and maintain underground storage. Mr. Tannen shared his hydraulic engineering knowledge. Mrs. Chen trained people in geological assessment. Mike Williams brought modern engineering techniques. Within 2 years, dozens of community members had developed enough expertise to design and maintain water systems independently. Emily was still available for consultation, but she was no longer indispensable. This is the difference between hero-based solutions and system-based solutions. Hero-based solutions depend on extraordinary individuals who possess special knowledge, unique skills, or unusual courage. They create dependency relationships where communities wait for someone else to solve their problems. System-based solutions distribute knowledge, build local capacity, and create redundant expertise so that communities can solve their own problems. Even when key individuals are unavailable, Emily intuitively understood this distinction. When Kyle Hammond offered to buy her water system, he was proposing a hero-based solution. AgriPure would be the expert provider, and farmers would be the dependent customers. When Emily offered to help her neighbors design their own systems, she was proposing a system-based solution. The community would develop its own expertise and maintain control over its own resources. This principle applies far beyond water management. Think about education. Hero-based education depends on charismatic teachers who inspire students through personal magnetism. System-based education creates learning environments where students develop intrinsic motivation and peer support networks that function regardless of which teacher is present. Think about economic development. Hero-based development depends on attracting outside investment from corporations or wealthy individuals. System-based development builds local business networks, credit unions, and cooperative enterprises that circulate wealth within the community. Think about healthcare. Hero-based healthcare depends on specialist doctors who diagnose and treat diseases. System-based healthcare emphasizes prevention, health education, and community wellness programs that reduce the need for intensive medical intervention. Think about social change. Hero-based activism depends on charismatic leaders who mobilize followers around their personal vision. System-based activism builds coalitions, trains organizers, and creates institutional changes that persist beyond any individual leader. The Westbrook Water Cooperative worked because Emily refused to be the hero. Instead, she helped build a system. That made heroes unnecessary. She documented everything so knowledge couldn't be lost if she moved away or became unavailable. She trained multiple people in each skill, so no single person became indispensable. She established democratic decision-making processes so the community could adapt and evolve without waiting for her permission. Most importantly, she created legal and organizational structures that prevented any individual, including herself, from controlling the cooperative for personal gain. The most sustainable solutions don't depend on heroes. They create systems that empower communities to solve their own problems and adapt to changing circumstances. This brings us to perhaps the most challenging question raised by Emily's story. How do we balance individual initiative with collective responsibility? How do you maintain individual autonomy while serving collective needs? Emily's story reveals why this balance matters more than we might think. One of the most nuanced aspects of Emily's decision-making was how she navigated the tension between personal rights and community obligations. She owned her grandfather's water system. She had every legal right to keep it private. But she also lived in a community facing a crisis that her knowledge could help solve. This tension appears in countless situations that don't make headlines, but shape how communities function. Consider the retired teacher who has decades of educational expertise but doesn't want to volunteer at the local school because she's done her time. She has every right to enjoy her retirement, but her community is losing valuable knowledge. Consider the small business owner who has figured out how to navigate local regulations efficiently, but doesn't share this knowledge with other entrepreneurs because they're competitors. He has every right to maintain competitive advantage, but his community's economic development suffers. Consider the parent who has learned effective strategies for advocating within the school system, but doesn't mentor other parents because she doesn't want additional responsibilities. She has every right to focus on her own family, but other children suffer from less effective advocacy. In each case, individual rights conflict with community benefits. There's no clear moral obligation to share private knowledge for public good, but there are consequences when communities lose access to distributed expertise. Emily's approach offers a framework for navigating these tensions. First, she acknowledged the legitimacy of both individual rights and community needs. She didn't pretend that her water system was purely private property with no community implications, nor did she accept that community need automatically overrode individual ownership. Second, she rejected false choices. The town meeting presented her with a binary option: sell to the corporation or remain selfish. Emily created a third alternative that honored both individual autonomy and community benefit. Third, she negotiated terms that protected her core values. Emily was willing to share her knowledge, but only under conditions that prevented corporate appropriation and maintained community control. Fourth, she maintained boundaries around her participation. Emily helped design systems and train people, but she didn't become responsible for maintaining everyone else's water supply. She contributed her expertise without sacrificing her independence. Fifth, she created reciprocal relationships rather than one-sided charity. The cooperative required everyone to contribute labor, materials, or knowledge according to their ability. Emily gave her expertise, but she also received community support for documentation, legal protection, and system implementation. This framework applies to anyone who possesses valuable knowledge, skills, or resources that could benefit others. You don't have to choose between selfishness and selflessness. You can choose contribution with boundaries, sharing with conditions, and cooperation with autonomy. You don't have to accept responsibility for solving everyone else's problems. You can contribute to solutions while maintaining your own priorities and limitations. You don't have to give away everything you've worked to develop. You can share knowledge while protecting your interests and values, but you also can't pretend that your individual gifts have no social implications. When you possess something that could genuinely help others, the choice to keep it private has community consequences. Emily's wisdom was recognizing that the most sustainable approach honors both individual autonomy and collective benefit. She found a way to serve her community without sacrificing herself and to maintain her independence without abandoning her neighbors. The tension between individual rights and community needs doesn't require choosing sides. It requires creative solutions that honor both personal autonomy and collective welfare. This brings us to the final lesson from Westbrook, Kansas. What happens when ordinary people discover they have more power than they realized? What if the most extraordinary thing about Emily Harper's story is how utterly ordinary Emily Harper actually was? Emily wasn't a brilliant scientist or a charismatic leader or a wealthy philanthropist. She was a 29-year-old woman who lived alone on a small farm, who preferred to avoid attention, who had never led anything more complex than a 4-H club project. She didn't invent revolutionary technology or discover hidden natural resources. She simply paid attention to what her grandfather had built, learned how it worked, and figured out how to make it better. She didn't possess unusual courage or exceptional communication skills. She was scared of public speaking, uncomfortable with conflict, and genuinely reluctant to take on responsibility for other people's problems. But Emily had 3 qualities that, combined together, created extraordinary results. She had knowledge that others needed. Not secret knowledge or advanced degrees or proprietary information, just careful observation and patient experimentation applied to local conditions. She had values that prioritized community benefit over personal gain. Not saintly selflessness or radical politics, just a practical understanding that communities work better when resources are shared rather than hoarded. She had courage to act on those values when the moment required it. Not fearless heroism or natural leadership, just the willingness to speak up when speaking up mattered more than staying comfortable. These three qualities, relevant knowledge, community-oriented values, and situational courage, are not rare or extraordinary. They exist in ordinary people throughout every community. The question is, what happens when ordinary people recognize and act on these qualities? Emily's story suggests the answer: extraordinary change becomes possible. But here's what's really remarkable about the Westbrook Water Cooperative. Emily wasn't the only ordinary person who stepped up when the moment required it. Mr. Tannen could have kept his engineering expertise to himself, enjoying retirement without additional responsibilities. Instead, he chose to mentor Emily and contribute his knowledge to community solutions. Sarah Jo could have written a simple human interest story and moved on to other assignments. Instead, she chose to investigate corporate practices and use her journalism skills to support community empowerment. Pastor Williams could have limited his involvement to spiritual guidance. Instead, he encouraged his son to contribute engineering expertise and open church facilities for community meetings. Sheriff Briggs could have maintained strict neutrality as a law enforcement officer. Instead, he facilitated dialogue and helped protect the community from external pressure. Even Jim Kowalski, who was initially Emily's harshest critic, chose to volunteer for the pilot program and contribute his labor to testing community solutions. Each of these ordinary people had a moment when they could have chosen comfort over contribution, individual benefit over community welfare, or silence over speaking up. Each chose to act on values larger than their immediate self-interest. The Westbrook Water Cooperative succeeded because it was built by a community of ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. Your community is full of ordinary people with relevant knowledge, community-oriented values, and the potential for situational courage. The question is, what crisis or opportunity will reveal these qualities and bring them together in service of common goals? Maybe it's an environmental challenge like drought or flooding. Maybe it's an economic crisis like plant closures or housing unaffordability. Maybe it's a social issue like education quality or elderly care. Maybe it's a political challenge like representation or government accountability. Whatever the issue, the solution probably won't come from corporate boardrooms or government agencies or non-profit organizations, at least not primarily. It will come from ordinary people who recognize their own power and choose to use it together. Emily Harper's story is ultimately about recognizing that power, the power of knowledge carefully gained through patient observation, the power of values that prioritize community welfare, the power of courage applied at moments when courage matters most. You have this power. Your neighbors have this power. Your community has this power. Every community contains ordinary people with extraordinary potential. People who possess the knowledge, values, and courage necessary to solve problems that seem impossible when faced alone, but become manageable when approached together. The ice drought in Westbrook, Kansas, ended when ordinary people stopped waiting for extraordinary solutions and started building extraordinary cooperation. Your community's challenges are waiting for the same approach. The shy farmer who solved a water crisis could be your neighbor, your co-worker, or the person you see in the mirror. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is recognize that we already have what we need. We just need the courage to use it together. This story began with one shy farmer and a water crisis. It ends with a community that learned to solve its own problems. What problem in your community is waiting for ordinary people to discover their extraordinary power?